don't know me, my name is Matthew Carr. I am a filmmaker from here in Los Angeles and have been doing the panels here for ToyCon for about 5 years. This is by far the most extreme, amazing group of people at this con. You guys have absolutely blown it out of the water, so thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate it. Interview panel by panel, we get to get a picture of this world and the lives that it touches and what it means to us. We get to play in it a little bit. So I encourage you, while the panel is going on, to think of a question that you might have. We're going to do a little Q&A a little later on, so have something ready to go. We're going to do it right over here. Without further ado, a legend of screen, a great author, an amazing man, Mr. LeVar Burton.
How y'all doing? Good. Right. Beautiful day, huh?
Yeah.
Doing a little bit more air in here. Santa Rosa, California. Nice. I grew up in Sacramento.
Yeah.
Cool. Woo.
This is like home to me. In fact, I drove from LA because I'm on my way to Sacramento tomorrow. And my sister used to live in Rohnert Park.
Yeah.
She lived in Cotati for a minute.
Cool.
The entire population of Cotati, ladies and gentlemen. Is anybody listening to LeVar Burton Reads? Not nearly enough of them.
It's good.
It's so great.
I'm too busy reading.
Fair enough. But LeVar Burton Reads is my podcast. In every episode, I read a different piece of short fiction. I like to say at the beginning of every episode, the only thing the stories have in common is that I love them, and I hope you will too. So if you are a fan of short fiction, or a fan of being read to, and who's not a fan of being read to? Check it out. We're in season 3. We have over 30, I think 3 episodes already. We drop a new one every Tuesday, and I'm going out on tour this November through the Northeast and the Southwest with LeVar Burton Reads Live. I know you all want to know what I know about the new Picard show. Let's talk.
Are you in it?
I can't tell you anything. Because I don't know anything. I know that Picard is back.
Okay.
Geordi back.
We want Jordy.
Yeah.
Where's Jordy?
Where's Jordy?
Captain Geordi.
I want Geordi back too. We'll see what happens. We all had dinner a couple of weeks ago, and Patrick was very gracious and picked up the check, which he never does, and told us as much as he could about what they're doing. And they're going to start shooting very, very soon. They're writing scripts. It's an idea that he is very excited about. And we shall see. In the fullness of time, it shall be revealed whether or not any of Picard's old friends, because we're not getting any younger, come to visit. Anybody watching Discovery?
Yeah.
And then they just announced, this is a great time to be a Trek fan. They just announced some shorts, Star Trek shorts, right? One-offs. I think 4 of them. One starring and directed by Rainn Wilson as the character Harry Mudd from the original series.
Oh, wow.
So that should be a lot of fun. It's a good time to be a fan. Anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Come on up here. Anybody that wants to ask a question, come on up right this way. Come on over here, young man. Stand. What's your name?
My name is Nate. I actually grew up with this gentleman right here.
You two grew up together?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, let's say thanks to LeVar for showing up again. Come on, show him up. Well, I've been the first question all day long, which is great, because that
You
means
wrote your questions down.
I'm a journalist, so it's what I do. I actually
strategy.
have quite a few questions, but
Quite a few questions.
So,
Yeah.
podcasting, it changed the intellectual landscape till the end of time, and you clearly found a new home with LeVar Burton Reads. I'm implementing the same strategy in my own podcast, and clearly it's changing lives. So given the new intellectual landscape of this mental health and all the new research for CTE and TBI and how integral reading
CTE,
is cerebral traumatic encephalopathy.
cerebral traumatic encephalopathy. Explain.
You know, people that do sports, MMA, football, American football,
These are
original
concussive
football.
brain injuries.
Right, yes. And given that the research that reading shows that it helps repair and recover.
Is that right?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
How about if you listen to books? Same effect?
I listen to books and it helped me repair my brain and be the journalist.
You suffer from CTE.
Yeah, I played hockey for years.
Oh yeah. But I see you have all your teeth.
No, I know.
Oh.
They're not great. Well, the question is, given the fact that you clearly are benefiting from podcasting and there's a resurgence of people wanting to be around and orbit LeVar Burton intellectually, how do you respond in going forward knowing that people have been listening the whole time, but you just didn't have the platform that you needed until you started doing the podcast?
Well, I mean, I feel like the past 42 years of my life in front of and behind the camera have sort of given me a platform and given folks access into my work. The podcast I'm really excited about because there's no barrier to entry for me. I wanted to do something creative and I didn't have to wait for permission from anybody. It's me and a microphone and a good short story. And I believe that some of the best storytelling is your imagination and a good book. And so I'm thrilled to be in the podcasting universe. It's a very immediate medium. And you're right, I think it is changing the intellectual landscape. It's all a part of what I call the democratization of content creation. We live in a really remarkable age where no one can prevent you from creating the content that you want to create. Oh my God.
Who's this?
This is Princess Spencer, Jordy LaForge's seeing eye dog.
Do you have a question today?
It's kind of more, so the episode Arsenal of Freedom, where they go down.
Was that a Ferengi episode?
What?
Was that a Ferengi episode? Arsenal of Freedom? What happened in Arsenal of Freedom?
When they go down to the planet and they produced weapons and sold weapons to friendlies and enemies and everything, where Jordy actually took over the ship.
Oh, yes.
And I
think he separated too.
He did,
yeah.
and I think that's where you as an actor finally had a chance to not sit behind the comm and really show what the character was capable of.
Yeah.
And in the next season, they made you
Engineer.
chief engineer.
Yeah, right.
Do you like where that went?
Sure.
As far as your character went, because you was just kind of a nobody at first in the beginning of season 1.
Well, you know, it was sort of a one-trick pony of a joke, right? That the blind man flew the ship. They did. But the real truth of the ship was that it was so sophisticated that it could really fly itself. So it really became necessary to find a place of expertise from which Geordi could contribute. Riker was the first officer. When you wanted information on feelings, you went to Troy. For information in general, you went to Data. If you wanted somebody beat up, you went to Worf. That's still the case to this very day. Whenever I have trouble with anybody, I send Michael Dorn in. Kick a little ass on my behalf.
Come on over, sir. What's your name?
My name's Mike.
Hey, Mike.
Good to see you. Thank you for coming today.
My pleasure.
I know it looks like a lot of fun being on the set and doing all these episodes. Can you share with us any moment, you know, behind the scenes, the most fun you had? The most fun
7 years of the most fun. That is what I will always treasure about doing the series, was the love and the friendships. We are all family to one another. We see each other whenever we can. And it's like
nothing for event, some special thing going on behind the scenes that was like super cool.
super cool. October 3rd, 1989, I got married. I mentioned that only because my best man was Brent Spiner.
Is that how we got the role?
No. And my groomsmen were Michael Dorn, Jonathan Frakes, and Patrick Stewart. Which simply means that my wedding picture kicks the hell out of your wedding.
How did the films feel compared to filming the series? Did you guys still have that
Which one?
same? Just in general,
No.
generations.
They were
all different.
all next-gen movies are not created equal.
Okay. This is what I want to know. This is what I want to know. Perfect. So, yeah, go from Generations to Nemesis. What was good, what was bad, and how did it compare to filming the series?
Well, in feature film, you have so much more time. We did one episode every 7 working days. We worked 5 days a week, 12 hours a day, for 10 months of the year, shooting 26 episodes a season.
I just got tired.
It's exhausting.
Wow.
It's work. For the feature films, you can take up to 3 to 4 months to make a feature. So you work at a much more relaxed pace, which is always nice for an actor. You get more time for rehearsal. It's a much more graceful, less harried process than series television.
Thank you for that. Tell us your name.
My name's Oliver.
Oliver, what's your question?
You did a while back a series that's no longer on. You were on a special edition of The Weakest Link. It was a Star Trek edition. And it seemed like there were a lot of jokes about it being a really long day. As if you guys haven't seen the show, I'm going to kind of spoil it, but he crushes Crusher. He does very well. And people get eliminated. There's kind of jokes like it's almost like you're doing them a favor as you're eliminating because it seems so long. So I just wanted to ask you about that experience, if it was fun, and what's it like to win a show on NBC?
Doing The Weakest Link was a blast for many reasons. Not the least of which is, I believe, Shatner was the first to get bounced. At the end, it came down to Robert Picardo and I. And in answering my question correctly, I won $137,500, which is still one of the top money-winning totals in the history of The Weakest Link. Yes, that was for charity.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thanks,
And
Oliver.
Oliver, I hope you don't mind me plugging you, is a fantastic comedian and just did some amazing sets on America's Got Talent. If you guys have time,
Wow.
please go online. Hello, welcome back. Tell us your name.
My name is Matt. Thank you, Mr. Burton, for coming to Santa Rosa. I really appreciate it. So my question is, given your work with Gene Roddenberry and your love of reading and literature, do do you feel that there are some themes or narratives that you would like to see explored more in science fiction television or movies or even in general literature being published today?
Well, I think that there is a great movement that some people call Afrofuturism in speculative fiction these days, and I'm a big fan of that. I'm a huge Octavia Butler fan. Love N.K. Jessamine, Leslie Neka Arima, Nnedi Okorafor. These women are changing the game in terms of speculative fiction.
Thank you. Hello, what's your name?
I'm Carl.
Hi, Carl. Come on over here.
Way up here.
Yeah.
Growing up watching Next Generation, my favorite relationship on that show was probably you and Data. I was wondering how much of the dynamics between your two characters came just straight from the writers. How much of it were you two able to kind of develop yourselves, or was it all just from the writers?
It wasn't all from the writers. I think Brent and I, over the course of the series, really developed a strong bond. And in fact, we all developed a really strong bond, and I think that the strength of those relationships really bled over into the characters. I think one of the successful aspects of Next Gen is that people tuned in every week to see people that they felt were friends of theirs, and they tuned in every week to see what that family was up to. I'm sure that the relationships that we express among one another were sort of energetically transmitted to the film, if that makes any sense to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tell us your name and what's your question, sir?
My name is Ray. Hello, Mr. Burton.
Hey, Ray.
You've, in my opinion, directed some of the best episodes of Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. Which is your favorite and why?
Ooh, Ray, that's so
I've known Ray a long time. I knew when he was coming up to ask you. I was so excited because it was my question as well.
You have any kids, Ray?
No.
No? No. Any
He's
pets?
raised a few of us, though.
Yeah? Is that right? Are you a teacher?
He's a magician.
Wow.
An illusionist.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you make me disappear?
Let's talk after.
Okay. Absolutely. Which one directing episode? Boy. Wow. Well, the one that really stands out. I mean, I Code of Honor, Deep Space Nine episode. I directed the 100th of Voyager, Timeless. My first though was Second Chances. It was a Next Gen episode where I had two Rikers, Will Riker and Thomas Riker, and that was really a trial by fire. I had to figure out which shots were photo double, which shots were VisFX. In the tease, I had Riker walking around Riker, and the Riker in the center of the circle was moving his head, clocking the movements of the other Riker. I had to figure out how to shoot that. I didn't sleep the entire time we were on stage with that show. And when we finished, I remember feeling, I can do this. I don't suck. And it gave me really a new career and a new way to be a storyteller. And I'll forever be grateful to Rick Berman for giving all of us who wanted to step across the line and direct. Jonathan was the first, and we established what came to be known as Star Trek University with Jonathan, which meant that if you wanted to direct, then you had to go to school. Right? You had to come in on your days off, you had to go to production meetings, you had to go to scoring sessions and spotting sessions, you had to spend time with every editor in the rotation. And at the end of your schooling period, you really came out on the other side with a complete and comprehensive education in the process of filmmaking. And then you got a slot. Whether you got a second slot really depended on how you performed the first time out, right? And Jonathan came out of that school. Jonathan makes his living now full-time as a director. Roxanne Dawson came out of that school, as did Robert Duncan McNeil. They make their livings full-time as directors. It was a pretty cool place to work if you wanted to expand your skill set.
Yeah. May I ask a follow-up?
No. Yes.
Any future directing jobs that we can look forward to seeing?
I do a lot. I do a lot of a show called NCIS NOLA.
New Orleans.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Thanks, guys. Now he's gonna leave.
Stars Scott Bakula, who I know from my days of directing Star Trek Enterprise. Yeah. Scott Bakula was on, yeah.
Quantum Leap.
I mean, after Quantum Leap.
You talked a little bit earlier about not knowing anything about the Picard series or these shorts or
Yes.
the one-offs. What would it mean to you to come back as a director in the Star Trek world? Would you jump at the chance?
I would certainly, if asked, serve. Absolutely.
And then final question for me.
I doubt it.
Final question in this round. Did going to that school make you a better actor?
Directing definitely has made me a better actor. It's made me a more responsible actor because when you're directing, you're in charge. And when you're in charge, you're responsible for making your day. That is, getting all of the work done in the time allotted with the resources given. And when you're directing, there is nothing more frustrating than waiting for an actor to come out of their training. And so, it has made me a more responsive and responsible actor being a director, because I never want to make another director wait as long as I do while I finish my phone call. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for indulging me. Tell us your name.
Hi, my name is Joseph, and I'd like to start by thanking you, Mr. Burton, for inspiring myself and a lot of other kids to actually start reading.
Thank you, Joseph. What are you reading these days, Joseph?
Sorry. Mostly fantasy novels. I actually just purchased 2 books today that were art novels over in the exhibition hall.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you I've asked other Star Trek actors this, but Galaxy Quest. How did you like it?
Love Galaxy Quest. Galaxy Quest was directed by a man named Dean Pariseau. If you go back to old episodes of Reading Rainbow, Dean Pariseau was our director of photography for many seasons of Reading Rainbow. Yeah. So I was very, very happy when Dean got the job. I was sad that it meant that he was leaving Reading Rainbow, but Galaxy Quest is one of my top 20 favorite films of all time.
Yes. What's number 1?
Lilies of the Field is number 1. Lilies of the Field, 1963, Sidney Poitier won an Academy Award. Number 2 on the list is Blade Runner. Number 3, anything with Thandie Newton in it. Such a crush on that woman. She did. She just won an Emmy the other night.
That was a performance and a half.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you. What is your name and what's your question?
My name is Ian, and I got 2 short questions.
Go for it.
I believe you had a role as a prince. Is that right?
A prince?
Yeah.
In what?
In a film.
A prince. Can you give
Somebody
me a hint?
got IMDb in here.
Yeah.
You all have phones. Come on.
Do you remember what the film was called?
Yeah, like a prince in Africa.
A Prince in Africa. Well, I did a mini-series at the beginning of my career called Roots, where I played an African warrior, but Kunta was not a prince. He was a warrior. Yeah. You're talking about Roots? Oh, well, why didn't you say so?
Did you ever meet the late Fred Rogers?
I did. Not only did I meet Fred, I did a show once. I did an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which was a career highlight for me. And Fred, I consider Fred not only a mentor, but a friend. I used to do, every Christmas, there's a show at Walt Disney World called Candlelight Processional. Remember? And it's this Christmas story told in music and song. It's a big production. It's at the Americas Pavilion at Epcot. A very lovely amphitheater. It's a real Disney production. They have a massed choir. There's a vocal quartet, the Voices of Liberty. There's a 36-piece orchestra. There are herald trumpeters. They make it snow. They release doves. It's a real Disney production. And Fred and his wife Joanne would come every year. They were also very close friends of one of the conductors that does that show. And I, over the years, really came to treasure my relationship with Fred and now his widow Joanne. Shameless plug. Maxwell King's biography of Fred Rogers called The Good Neighbor is out, and the audio version of that book is read by LeVar Burton. So run out and pick that puppy up.
Right outside sign-up sheets on your way.
It is on auto.
Tell us your name and your question.
My name is Shane, and I was wondering how your visor worked when you played as Jordy.
How the visor worked? You mean in terms of the logic of the show, or what was the effect when?
How did it enable you to see?
It enabled Jordy to see, because when LeVar put the visor on, he couldn't see shit. Which is so amazing, because I was playing a guy who could see more than everybody else, but when I put the thing on that enabled him to see, I was blind. I could not see above my head. I could not see my feet. Now, one of the problems with that is that the chief engineer has to move with confidence everywhere he goes on the ship. And not being able to see my feet meant that I had to figure out how to move with confidence and alacrity around those sets without constantly looking down to see where I was going. So I actually developed a system whereby I used points of reference in every room that we shot in so that I could triangulate where I was. So wearing the visor actually took 80% of my vision away, yet Jordy, to answer your question, when he puts the visor on, he sees all of what we know to be the electromagnetic spectrum. Jordy sees everything from infrared to X-ray, and all of the bands of energy in between. Jordy sees sound.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I have two short questions. The first is, how was it on The Big Bang Theory with Jim Parsons?
I love The Big Bang Theory. Any Big Bang Theory fans in the room? This is the last season. They're shooting the last season. No, I think
If Reading Rainbow was to come back, would you want to be the host again?
I brought Reading Rainbow back a few years ago as a digital concern for today's wired generation. It's an app. It's not called Reading Rainbow anymore. It's called LeVar Burton Kids Skybrary. It's a digital library with, at this point, over 1,000 books, over 250 video field trips, combining the real world with literature, just like we did on Reading Rainbow for all of those years on PBS. It's called Skybrary, like a library in the sky. And the Kickstarter that we had in 2014 or 2015 enabled us to get what was originally an iPad app and make a universal app. So it's available on phones, on all Android devices. We built a version of it for the web at LeVarBurtonKids.com, and we were also able to develop a product specifically for teachers to use, which is our digital library with an interface of 36 lesson plans for teachers. They can roster up to 40 kids. It's a turnkey solution for supplemental reading for teachers to use in the classrooms with their emerging readers. So I'm real proud of that.
Involved in the production of it?
I star in all 250 video field trips, and I read about a third of the titles in the service.
Right on. So Reading Rainbow is alive and well.
Well, it's not called Reading Rainbow.
But that idea.
Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Come on over here. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Samantha.
Hi, Samantha.
I have 2 questions. One is, who are you? No. I just said that because I have breasts.
Do you not know what's happening in the world right now?
No. Okay, so
hashtag anything.
I'm so lost. I'm a woman and I have no idea what's going on. So no, actually, I wanted to.
Good question. Let's go.
I wanted. Okay. First, my mom wanted me to say that I should give you a big hug if I'm able to, which of course I'm not crazy like she is. But she says he feels like such a part of our family since we have watched Reading Rainbow and Star Trek. And that is very true. I grew up with you in my life. And I wanted to ask, what is it that drives you to make decisions in your film and television career?
Basically, to make my mom proud.
Good morning, sir. What's your name?
My name's Daryl, and
Daryl, you have a great hair day. You really are. You're having a great hair day, Daryl.
I don't want to offend anybody, anybody that you've worked for, but or guys that have been directed by, but I know you're a director. Who's the easiest director you've ever had to work for, and who's the hardest director?
Easiest director I have had to work for. Easiest in terms of what? Daryl. Easy how? What do you mean easy?
You just fall into place.
Yeah, everything just goes smooth. It's just.
Well, I'll tell you, when I'm directing myself, LeVar the director kind of already knows what LeVar the actor is going to do. And so when LeVar the actor does what he does, LeVar the director has no choice but to say, good job. Oh, what you didn't say other than myself, Daryl. I think my favorite director is probably Jonathan Frakes. Yeah, I love working with Jonathan. He's great. He's a really, really, really talented director.
And the hardest director?
Hardest director was a guy named Lee. I can't remember his last name. It's probably a good thing. He was a yeller. He was a screamer, in fact. At least once a day he was going to scream at somebody, and that was just, it made me so uncomfortable. Sometimes you learn from people what not to do when it's your turn, and I learned a lot from Lee in terms of what not to do as a director.
Hi, LeVar. I'm Erica.
Hi, Erica.
I grew up also with Reading Rainbow and then Star Trek pretty much all my teenage and adult life, and I actually love your podcast. I love storytelling. My 2 questions are actually involving books. So the first one is, is there a children's book that you find yourself going back to with kids in particular?
Yeah.
Like say you come home and or someone brings the kids over and you're like, this is the book.
Yeah.
What book is that?
There are three, really. I love the book Amazing Grace by Mary Hoffman. Story about a young girl named Grace who wants to play Peter Pan in her school play, and some of her classmates don't think that's such a good idea because Grace is not only a girl, but she's black. And I adore that book because Grace proves that through the power of her imagination, she can be anything she wants. Right? Another book that I love to read with kids is called Enemy Pie by Derek Munson. A great, funny book about a young boy who has a new neighbor who becomes his enemy. And his dad tells him that he will help with his enemy problem by making enemy pie. And the boy is excited about all of the nasty, disgusting things they might put in this enemy pie to serve to his enemy. And his dad says, the only catch is you have to spend an entire day with your enemy. And at the end of the story, spoiler alert, at the end of the story, the boy recognizes that he just made a new friend and lost his best enemy. So I love the message of that book, and I had the opportunity to read that book to a group of Palestinian children in Israel. And it was one of the best days of my life.
Wow.
The third book, shameless self-promotion, is a children's book called The Rhino Who Swallowed a Storm, written by one of my favorite authors, me. So I love reading Rhino. I love reading Rhino to kids as well.
And then just my second question is there one book as an adult that you find yourself that you either will always go back to, or if this is the one book that you're like, if I had to read this the rest of my life, what book, or kind of like anthology, if you want to make it a little bit bigger, would that be?
Well, the one book that I have read over and over and over and over is Goodnight Moon, because I read it every night to my daughter, who's now 24, and I'm still reading to her. So I'd have to say Goodnight Moon if I had to read one book, because I've already lived that life where I read this book every night for my daughter's childhood. I'm gonna go with that. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, the last few questions coming up. Come on over.
Hi, I'm Cameron.
Hey, Cameron.
Hey, so, like, Worf crossed over and O'Brien crossed over. Would you ever want to cross over into another Star Trek series and do more episodes or more seasons of Star Trek?
I think that ship has sailed, Cameron.
Would you like to go on another series, basically?
Well, I know that Michael Dorn has more money than God. So, that might not have been so bad. Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron. Hey, brother, what's going on?
My name's Rob.
Hey, Rob.
On playing a now iconic character with a disability, can you talk a little bit about that, how that came to be, and how it affected you as an actor?
It's a great question, Rob. I don't know if you know this story, but the character Geordie LaForge was named after a superfan that Gene Roddenberry would encounter at the cons back in the days of when the original series went off the air and cons were just starting up. He had cerebral palsy, was confined to a wheelchair, and Gene used to tell the story. One weekend he'd be in Seattle and there would be this kid and his mom, and then the next weekend he'd be in Des Moines and there was this kid in his wheelchair and his mom. And his name was Jordan LaForge. And so when Gene was developing the next generation, he wanted the pilot, in essence, to be blind. And he wanted to honor Jordan by naming a character for him. And that's how Jordy got his name. Oh, so the second part of that is to have grown up watching the original series and seeing myself represented on the original bridge crew by Nichelle Nichols as Lieutenant Uhuru. It meant a tremendous lot to me. I believe that it is difficult, if not impossible, to grow up with a healthy self-image unless you see yourself reflected in the popular culture, right? I'm 61, so when I was growing up, anybody black on TV was caused to call each other on the phone, right? My kids have grown up in a different era where hip-hop is the lingua franca all over the world, and they see people of color on television and film and magazines. So to have grown up and not only become a member of Gene's storytelling family, but to represent for the physically challenged what Lieutenant Uhuru represented for me, I don't have words, Rob.
Yes.
I don't have words.
And I would like to ask, as an engineer on Starship Enterprise,
Jennifer, just spoiler alert. I'm not an engineer. I just play one on television and in movies. And I'd like to think that, I mean, I love technology, but my whole strategy for playing Geordi LaForge, aside from not bumping into the furniture, was to take what we call technobabble, because Geordi and Data had a lot of complicated dialogue, and it's difficult to memorize because it's not like a conversation where you can follow the conversation and one thing follows another, and it's sort of a logical progression of thought expressed as a conversation. It's like memorizing the phone book. And so my strategy was, in order to give you the impression that Geordi knew exactly what he was talking about, I just spit that shit out as fast as I possibly could. Thanks, Jennifer.
Last two questions right here.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Angie, and as many people have said, we grew up watching you. We're so grateful for the work that you've done in so many different areas. The end of Nemesis, Data's dead. Riker's gone with Deanna Troi. Worf's probably back at Deep Space Nine. Were you the second officer, the first officer?
Well, let's see. Worf's not on board. Data's dead. Yeah!
You're number one.
Yes!
It only took 7 years and 5 movies, but that's far out.
Awesome.
All right, last question. Here we go.
Hi. So I've heard.
What's your name?
Corey. So I've heard stories about I had to look it up. Leonard Maislish.
Leonard Maislish. He was Gene's lawyer.
Yeah, I've heard that he was like crazy, like in control, and like he would try to take over. Did you have any encounters with that?
I didn't have a relationship with Leonard, so I can't corroborate anything like that. But I know he was around in the beginning because he was Gene's lawyer. Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us about working with Spot?
Working with Spot the cat?
Yeah.
I hated Spot.
The dreams of many just popped. The cat's fault, or do you just not like cats?
No, I love cats. I just didn't like Spot.
Was it one cat throughout the whole thing?
It was one cat.
Oh, no?
One cat,
Just
yeah.
lived on set?
First of all, let me explain something to you. There's a whole industry around training animals to appear in motion pictures and television. You can't train a cat. So anytime we had to do a scene with the cat, it was just, you can't train a cat. The thing you can get the cat to do is have food, put it on a mark, and let the cat be there. If the cat happens to be not hungry, the cat will wander where a cat will go. I hated that cat. And I was not alone.
Rat like the cat?
Say what?
Rat like the cat?
No.
Did the handler at least enjoy the cat, or was it just like, here we go again?
God, I hope so.
LeVar, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's been an honor.
Thank you all for your time, for your attention. I'll see you next time, but you don't have to take my word for it.